The old house of Margaret stood silent under the evening sky, its walls whispering stories of generations past. As dusk settled, the interior was bathed in the gentle glow of a few scattered lamps. Margaret sat in her favorite armchair by the window, her gaze fixed on the garden outside, now overgrown, yet still holding the charm of her late husband's meticulous care. She was in her twilight years, her thoughts often drifting between the present and the many yesterdays that had shaped her life. Tonight, however, her mind was on her grandchildren. Ethan entered the room quietly, still dressed in his graduation gown. The pride of completing his medical degree was evident in his eyes, yet there was a flicker of uncertainty that Margaret, with her years of wisdom, did not miss. "Grandma," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "I'm finally a doctor." He couldn't hide the pride in his voice. Margaret turned her gaze from the window to her grandson, a warm smile spreading across her face. "I always knew you'd make it, Ethan. Your grandfather would have been so proud." Ethan sat down on the sofa opposite her, his hands clasped together nervously. "But now, I have to decide what comes next. I've been offered a position at a prestigious hospital in the city." Margaret's smile faded slightly as she considered his words. "The city," she repeated, her voice heavy with both understanding and concern. "That's far from here." Ethan nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know, Grandma, but it's an incredible opportunity. I feel like I've been waiting for this my whole life." Silence enveloped them for a moment, the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway marking the passage of time. Margaret reached out and placed a gentle hand on Ethan's. "This house, this town, it's been our home for generations. I had hoped you might stay, to keep our family's legacy alive." Ethan squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of her words. "I understand, Grandma, but I also feel trapped here. I need to spread my wings to see what I can become." Margaret looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "I know, dear, and I would never hold you back. Just promise me you'll remember where you come from and who helped you get there." "I promise," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. He stood up, feeling the need to move, to shake off the heavy emotions that hung in the air. "I'll always remember." As Ethan left the room, Margaret remained by the window, her thoughts drifting back to when she had first brought Ethan and Linda into this home after their parents had passed away. The years had been hard, but filled with love and resilience. She had watched them grow, had seen their first steps, heard their first words, and now she was witnessing their steps into the future. Linda entered the room, her daughter Valerie trailing behind her. "Mom," Linda said, breaking Margaret's reverie, "it's getting late. Valerie and I are heading to bed." Margaret smiled, reaching out to pat Valerie's head. "Good night, my loves. Sleep well." "Good night, Grandma," Valerie said with a sleepy smile before following her mother upstairs. As the house grew quieter, Margaret's thoughts lingered on Ethan's words. She knew the day would come when her grandchildren would leave the nest, but it didn't make the reality any easier. She sighed deeply, a mixture of hope and melancholy settling over her. The night deepened, and Margaret closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer for Ethan's journey and for the legacy of their family to endure through the choices he made. The moonlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate shadows on the walls of the old house. The night was deep, silent, but for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the soft hum of the night breeze. Margaret lay in her bed, her breathing shallow and labored. Her health had been declining rapidly, and the weight of her years was evident in her frail form. Ethan and Linda had been taking turns caring for her, their lives revolving around her needs. Tonight, it was Ethan's turn. He moved quietly around the room, tidying up and ensuring Margaret was comfortable. As he adjusted the blankets around her, his eyes caught the edge of an old, leather-bound journal peeking out from beneath a stack of papers on the nightstand. Curiosity piqued, Ethan gently pulled the journal free. It was Margaret's handwriting, neat and precise, filling the pages with notes, thoughts, and what seemed to be a record of important documents. As he flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. Ethan picked it up and unfolded it, his heart racing as he realized it was Margaret's will. The will outlined her wishes in clear terms, leaving the bulk of her estate to be divided equally between Ethan and Linda. Ethan's eyes lingered on the words, a spark of greed igniting within him. The thought of sharing the inheritance was suddenly intolerable. He had sacrificed so much, worked so hard. Surely he deserved more. He glanced at Margaret, asleep and unaware of his discovery. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, but the lure of wealth and the prospect of a different future was too strong. With a quick, furtive movement, Ethan slipped the will into his pocket and left the room. Later that night, in the seclusion of his own room, Ethan spread the will out on his desk. His mind raced, considering his options. He knew what he was about to do was wrong, but the temptation was overwhelming. He could forge a new will, one that would grant him the majority of Margaret's estate. He had always been good with details, and he was confident he could replicate her handwriting well enough to pass scrutiny. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. He hastily covered the papers and turned to see Linda standing in the doorway. "Ethan, is everything all right?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "You've been up here for a while." "Yes, everything's fine," Ethan replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some time to think." Linda nodded, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. "All right, but don't stay up too late. We both need rest, especially with Grandma's condition." "I know. I'll come down soon," Ethan assured her. As Linda left, closing the door softly behind her, Ethan let out a sigh of relief. He knew he had to act quickly. He spent the next few hours meticulously copying the will, altering it to reflect his new plan. The house was quiet, the only sound the scratching of his pen on the paper. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, he looked at his work. The forgery was perfect. Now came the hardest part, convincing Margaret to sign it without reading it. Ethan waited for the right moment. A few days later, when Margaret seemed lucid and in good spirits, he approached her with the new will. "Grandma," he said softly, sitting beside her bed, "I need you to sign this document. It's just a formality for the lawyer, something to do with my graduation paperwork." Margaret looked at him with tired, loving eyes. "Of course, dear. I trust you." Her hands trembled as she took the pen, her frailty more apparent than ever. Ethan guided her hand to the signature line, his heart pounding in his chest. She signed without a second glance, and Ethan quickly gathered the papers, a mixture of triumph and guilt swirling inside him. "Thank you, Grandma," he said, kissing her forehead. "Rest now." As Margaret closed her eyes, unaware of the deceit, Ethan left the room, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. The act was done, and there was no turning back. He had crossed a line, driven by a desire for more than what he had been given, but the weight of his actions hung heavy over him. The morning sun filtered gently through the lace curtains of Margaret's old house, casting a soft glow on the wooden floors. The house, usually filled with the quiet hum of life, was now eerily silent. Margaret's room, where she had spent her final days, was imbued with a somber stillness. Linda and Ethan entered the room together, their steps hesitant. Margaret lay in her bed, her eyes closed, a serene smile on her lips as if she had found peace. The siblings stood by her side, their hearts heavy with grief. For Linda, the loss was profound, a chasm that felt impossible to bridge. Ethan, though burdened by his own guilt, struggled to maintain his composure. In the days that followed, the house was shrouded in a pall of sorrow. Friends and family came to pay their respects, their condolences a hollow echo in the grand old rooms. Linda and Valerie, her young daughter, were left to navigate this new reality without the guiding presence of Margaret. On a crisp, clear morning, Linda and Valerie began the daunting task of sorting through Margaret's belongings. The house was a labyrinth of memories, each item a poignant reminder of the woman who had held their family together. "Mom, look at this!" Valerie called out, holding up an old photograph of a young Margaret. Linda smiled through her tears as she took the picture from her daughter's hands. "She was so beautiful," Linda whispered, tracing the outline of Margaret's face with her finger. "She always had that sparkle in her eye." Valerie hugged her mother, sensing the deep well of emotion that Linda was trying to contain. "We'll be okay, right, Mom?" Linda nodded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. "Yes, sweetheart, we'll be okay. We have each other, and we have this house. It's part of our family's history." As they moved from room to room, packing away trinkets and treasures, they stumbled upon a small, ornate box tucked away in the back of Margaret's wardrobe. It was old, with intricate carvings and a faded patina. Linda's curiosity was piqued. "Let's see what's inside," she said, lifting the lid carefully. Inside the box, amid letters and photographs, lay a folded piece of paper. Linda's breath caught in her throat as she recognized Margaret's handwriting. It was the original will, the one Ethan had hidden away. "Mom, what is it?" Valerie asked, peering over her mother's shoulder. "It's Grandma's real will," Linda replied, her voice shaking. She unfolded the document, her eyes scanning the familiar lines. Unlike the forged will, this one split the estate equally between Linda and Ethan, just as Margaret had intended. Linda felt a surge of anger and betrayal. How could Ethan have done this? But beneath the anger was a steely resolve. She would not let his deceit go unanswered. "We need to take this to Mr. Johnson," Linda said, referring to the family lawyer. "This is what Grandma wanted, and we need to make sure it's honored." Valerie nodded, her young face set with determination. Grandma would want us to do the right thing. As they drove to Mr. Johnson's office, Linda's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Mr. Johnson's law office, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Linda sat nervously on the edge of her seat, clutching the newly discovered will in her hands. Valerie sat beside her. Mr. Johnson, an elderly man with kind eyes and a sharp mind, leaned back in his leather chair, carefully studying the document Linda had handed him. The silence in the room was thick with anticipation. "Mrs. Johnson," Linda began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I found this will hidden in my grandmother's desk. It clearly states her true intentions. Ethan must have known about this and forged a different document to deceive us." Mr. Johnson nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the pages. "This is indeed significant, Linda. If this document is genuine, it completely invalidates the one Ethan presented." Linda let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I need to make sure my grandmother's wishes are honored. She wanted Valerie and me to have the house, the savings, everything. Ethan has taken advantage of her trust." Mr. Johnson placed the will gently on his desk and looked up at Linda. "We will need to verify the authenticity of this will. If it holds up, we can challenge Ethan's claims in court. But we must proceed carefully." Valerie, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Mr. Johnson, do you think Ethan will fight back?" Mr. Johnson gave her a reassuring smile. "People often fight when they believe they have something to lose, but we will be prepared. Your grandmother's true wishes will be our guiding light." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. Mr. Johnson began the process of authenticating the will, contacting handwriting experts and reviewing Margaret's financial records. Linda and Valerie provided as much information as they could, hoping to piece together the full extent of Ethan's deceit. One afternoon, as Linda and Valerie sat in the lawyer's office, Mr. Johnson looked up from a pile of papers with a grave expression. "Linda, there are discrepancies in the financial records that suggest Ethan has been manipulating funds for some time. This is more than just a forged will." Linda felt a surge of anger. "He betrayed our family's trust. We need to expose everything." Mr. Johnson nodded. "We will, but we must be meticulous. Ethan is a doctor, and he will have resources at his disposal. We need to gather irrefutable evidence." Valerie reached for her mother's hand. "Mum, we can do this. Grandma would want us to." Linda squeezed her daughter's hand, drawing strength from her unwavering support. "Yes, Valerie, we will make sure the truth comes out." Together they delved deeper into the investigation. Mr. Johnson uncovered several suspicious transactions that pointed to Ethan diverting funds into personal accounts. Linda and Valerie spent long hours recounting every detail of their interactions with Ethan, hoping to recall something that could be used against him. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, a clearer picture of Ethan's betrayal emerged. It was painful for Linda to accept that her own brother could stoop so low, but her resolve only grew stronger. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Linda and Valerie returned home to Margaret's old house. The air was cool and the sky painted with the hues of twilight. They sat on the porch, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. "Mum," Valerie said softly, breaking the quiet, "do you think Ethan will ever realize what he's done?" Linda sighed, looking out at the garden where she and Ethan had played as children. "I hope so, Valerie. But right now, we need to focus on what's right. Grandma trusted us to take care of this place and each other." Valerie nodded, her young face reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "We will. For Grandma." The following week, Mr. Johnson called them into his office. "Linda, Valerie," he began, "we have enough evidence to take this to court. The will is genuine, and we can prove Ethan's fraudulent activities. It won't be easy, but we have a strong case." Linda felt a weight lift off her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We are ready for this fight." The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the courtroom, casting an almost ethereal glow over the tense faces gathered within. Linda sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Valerie sat beside her, offering silent support, while Mr. Johnson organized the mountain of evidence they had collected. Across from them, Ethan looked composed, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," she announced, her voice resonating with authority. "We are here to determine the validity of the will of the late Margaret Evans." Mr. Johnson rose first, presenting their case with meticulous detail. "Your Honor, we have substantial evidence to prove that the will presented by Mr. Ethan Evans is a forgery. We have the genuine will discovered by Mrs. Linda Evans, which clearly outlines her mother's true intentions." He proceeded to outline the discrepancies they had found, presenting documents, expert testimonies, and financial records that painted a clear picture of Ethan's deceit. Linda watched as the judge's eyes narrowed, absorbing each piece of evidence with keen interest. Ethan's lawyer then stood, attempting to counter the allegations. "Your Honor, we dispute the authenticity of the document presented by the plaintiff. My client has always acted in good faith, and we have additional evidence to support the legitimacy of the will he holds." Ethan himself took the stand, his demeanor calm and composed. "I loved my grandmother dearly," he began, his voice steady. "She always wanted the best for me and supported my education. This will reflect her desire to see me succeed," the courtroom murmured, sensing the emotional weight of his words. But Linda knew the truth and felt a surge of anger at his manipulation. Mr. Johnson cross-examined Ethan, his questions pointed and precise. "Mr. Evans, can you explain the significant financial transfers to your personal accounts from your grandmother's estate?" Ethan hesitated, but then, to everyone's surprise, he pulled out a document from his briefcase. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the judge directly, "I have here a notarized seal and additional paperwork that supports my claim." He handed the papers to the judge, who examined them carefully. The courtroom held its collective breath as she scrutinized the new evidence. Mr. Johnson quickly scanned the documents and his face grew tense. He leaned over to Linda and whispered, "This changes things. We'll need time to verify this." The judge looked up, her expression unreadable. "In light of this new evidence, I am granting a recess. Court will reconvene once we have had the opportunity to thoroughly examine these documents." Linda felt a wave of frustration and disbelief. How could Ethan have something so crucial that they hadn't anticipated? As they left the courtroom, Valerie clung to her mother's arm, her face pale. "Mum, what do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We keep fighting," Linda replied, her voice firm. "Mr. Johnson, what's our next step?" "We need to delve deeper. There's no way Margaret would have left such a significant amount to Ethan without some clear indication. We'll go through her records again, and we need to verify the authenticity of this new seal." The evening had settled quietly over Margaret's old house, its familiar walls bathed in the soft glow of lamps and the occasional flicker of candlelight. Tonight, it was a sanctuary for Linda and Valerie, who were determined to uncover the final pieces of evidence needed to ensure justice for Margaret. "Mum, where should we start?" Valerie asked, her voice a mix of determination and curiosity, as she looked around the cluttered study. Linda sighed, feeling the weight of the task ahead. "We need to go through every document, every letter. Anything that could help us prove the authenticity of Grandma's will." They began their search methodically, each taking a section of the study. Linda opened an old wooden chest filled with Margaret's personal letters and journals, while Valerie sifted through the stacks of papers on the desk. As they worked, the air in the room seemed to thicken with the presence of the past. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway was a steady reminder of the time slipping away. The only other sounds were the rustling of papers and the occasional sigh of frustration. "Mom, look at this," Valerie said suddenly, holding up a faded photograph. It was a picture of Margaret with her lawyer, Mr. Johnson, taken many years ago. On the back, in Margaret's neat handwriting, was a note, "Discussed future plans with Johnson. Important." Linda's eyes widened. "This is good, Valerie. It shows that Grandma trusted Mr. Johnson and had detailed conversations about her estate. It adds credibility to the will we found." Valerie smiled, encouraged by the discovery. "Let's keep looking. There has to be more." Hours passed, as they meticulously combed through every nook and cranny of the study. Just when it seemed they had exhausted all possible leads, Valerie's voice broke the silence again. "Mum, I found something." She pulled a leather-bound journal from the back of a drawer. It was Margaret's diary, its pages filled with entries spanning decades. Linda's hands trembled as she took the journal. "This could be it, Valerie. This could be what we need." They sat down together, carefully turning the pages. The entries were rich with Margaret's thoughts, dreams, and reflections on her family. Then they found what they were looking for, an entry dated just a few months before her death. "Spoke with Johnson today about updating my will. I want to make sure Linda and Valerie are taken care of. Ethan has his own path, but the house and savings should go to them. Must finalize soon." Linda's eyes filled with tears as she read the words. "This is it, Valerie. This is what we need to prove Grandma's intentions. It's in her own handwriting." Valerie hugged her mother tightly. "We did it, Mom. We found the proof." With the diary in hand, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. The evidence was undeniable. Margaret's own words, her own thoughts, documented in a way that could not be disputed. They knew that this would be a turning point in their fight for justice. The next morning, they met with Mr. Johnson at his office. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful as they laid out their findings. "Mr. Johnson," Linda began, handing him the diary and the photograph. "We found these in Grandma's study. Her diary entries confirm everything we've been saying. She wanted the house and her savings to go to us." Mr. Johnson carefully examined the diary, nodding thoughtfully. "This is excellent, Linda. Margaret's own words are powerful evidence. The photograph also supports her trust in me, which will help our case." He looked up, his eyes filled with determination. "With this, we can move forward confidently. The court will see the truth, and Ethan's deception will be fully exposed." The preparation for the final court date intensified. Linda and Valerie, bolstered by their discovery, worked closely with Mr. Johnson to ensure every detail was perfect. They knew that the battle was not just about the inheritance, but about honoring Margaret's legacy and ensuring that justice was served. The evening before the court date, Linda and Valerie sat together in the living room, the diary open on the table between them. The house, now a symbol of their struggle and resilience, felt more like a home than ever before. "Mum," Valerie said softly, "Grandma would be proud of us. We're doing the right thing." Linda nodded, her heart swelling with pride and love. "Yes, Valerie, we're fighting for her, for us, and for what's right. No matter what happens, we know the truth, and that's what matters." The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Linda took one last look around the house. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the. Linda sat beside Mr. Johnson, her heart pounding as the final pieces of evidence were about to be presented. Across the room, Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a tense look on his face. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the judge entered. The courtroom fell silent, the gravity of the moment sinking in. "We are here to continue the matter of the contested will of Margaret Evans," the judge began, her voice steady and authoritative. "Mr. Johnson, you may proceed with your evidence." Mr. Johnson stood, holding the leather-bound diary and the photograph Linda and Valerie had discovered. "Your Honor, we have uncovered significant new evidence that supports the authenticity of the will found by Linda Evans. This diary, written by Margaret Evans herself, details her intentions regarding her estate." He handed the diary to the court clerk, who brought it to the judge. "Furthermore," he continued, "we have a photograph of Margaret with me, taken years ago. with a note indicating her discussions about her will. This corroborates her entries in the diary. The judge examined the diary, her expression focused. "Proceed," she said, nodding. Mr. Johnson called his first witness, a handwriting expert. "Dr. Roberts, can you confirm the authenticity of the handwriting in this diary?" Dr. Roberts, a seasoned expert, took the stand. "Yes, Mr. Johnson. I have analyzed the handwriting in this diary and compared it to verified samples of Margaret Evans' handwriting. It is a match." The judge leaned forward. "Dr. Roberts, are you certain of your findings?" "Absolutely, Your Honor," Dr. Roberts replied confidently. "There is no doubt that this diary was written by Margaret Evans." Mr. Johnson smiled slightly, sensing the tide turning in their favor. "Thank you, Dr. Roberts." Next, Mr. Johnson presented the photograph to the court. "Your Honor, this photograph was found in Margaret's study, with a note on the back detailing her discussions with me about her will. It further supports the diary entries." The judge studied the photograph, then nodded to Mr. Johnson to continue. "I would now like to call Linda Evans to the stand," he announced. Linda stood, her legs feeling shaky, but her resolve firm. She took her place at the witness stand, looking directly at Ethan as she did. His eyes darted away, unable to meet her gaze. "Linda," Mr. Johnson began, "can you describe how you found this diary and photograph?" Linda took a deep breath. "Yes. My daughter Valerie and I were searching through my grandmother's study, looking for anything that could prove her true intentions. We found the diary hidden in a drawer and the photograph among her personal letters. It was clear to us that she intended for us to find them." Mr. Johnson nodded. "And what was your reaction upon finding these items?" Linda's voice wavered slightly with emotion. "I felt a deep sense of relief and validation. I knew my grandmother wanted us to be taken care of, and this diary confirmed it. It was her final message to us." The judge listened intently, then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Evans, do you have any questions for the witness?" Ethan's lawyer stood, looking hesitant. "No questions, Your Honor." The judge then addressed Ethan directly. "Mr. Evans, do you have anything to say in your defense regarding these new pieces of evidence?" Ethan stood, his face pale. "Your Honor, I made mistakes. I took advantage of the situation, and I am deeply sorry. But I never intended for it to go this far." The judge's expression remained stern. "Intentions aside, Mr. Evans, your actions have brought us to this point. The evidence presented today is compelling and indicates a clear attempt to defraud the court and your family." After reviewing all the evidence presented, the judge began, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. "It is clear that the will presented by Linda Evans is indeed the true last testament of Margaret Evans. The diary entries, the photograph, and the handwriting analysis all confirm this. The forged will presented by Ethan Evans is hereby declared invalid." Linda felt a wave of relief wash over her, and she squeezed Valerie's hand, who smiled up at her with tears in her eyes. "We did it, Mom," Valerie whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The judge continued, her tone turning stern as she addressed Ethan. "Mr. Ethan Evans, your actions have not only been deceitful, but also illegal. You exploited your grandmother's trust, manipulated financial records, and attempted to defraud your own family. The court finds you guilty of fraud and embezzlement. You will face the legal consequences of your actions." Ethan lowered his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Linda watched him, feeling a mixture of pity and a sense of justice being served. This was not how she wanted things to turn out, but it was necessary for the truth to prevail. Turning back to Linda, the judge's expression softened Linda Evans, Valerie Evans, the court acknowledges your rightful claim to Margaret Evans's estate. Her house, savings, and personal belongings are legally yours. Tears streamed down Linda's face as she nodded in gratitude. "Thank you, Your Honor," she managed to say, her voice choked with emotion. As the judge adjourned the court, Mr. Johnson turned to Linda and Valerie, a satisfied smile on his face. "Congratulations, Linda. Justice has been served. Your grandmother's true wishes have been honored." "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," Linda replied, her heart full of gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you." Valerie hugged her mother tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Mum. Grandma would be too." Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and fresh, a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere inside. Linda and Valerie walked down the steps, hand in hand, feeling a profound sense of peace and closure. "Mum, what are we going to do now?" Valerie asked, looking up at her mother with wide, hopeful eyes. Linda smiled, her heart light for the first time in months. "We're going to honor Grandma's memory by taking care of her house and each other. We'll make it a home filled with love and happiness, just as she wanted." Back at Margaret's old house, the familiar creak of the wooden floors and the gentle hum of life returning filled the rooms. Linda and Valerie set to work, breathing new life into the space that held so many memories. They cleaned, repaired, and decorated, each action a tribute to the woman who had given them so much. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, Linda and Valerie sat on the porch, sipping hot cocoa and reflecting on their journey. "Mom," Valerie said, her voice soft and reflective, "do you think Grandma is watching over us?" Linda smiled, looking out at the garden where the flowers were beginning to bloom again. "I believe she is, Valerie, and I think she's very proud of us." Valerie nodded, a contented smile on her face. "I'm happy we could do this for her." "Me too, sweetheart," Linda replied, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "Me too." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Linda and Valerie felt the warmth of their love and resilience. They had faced incredible challenges and emerged stronger, bound by the legacy of a remarkable woman whose spirit continued to guide them. The house, now vibrant with new life and filled with the sounds of laughter and love, stood as a testament to their journey. Linda knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but she also knew that they would face them together with the same determination and strength that had brought them this far. In the end, justice had been served and Margaret's legacy had been preserved. Linda and Valerie looked forward to a future filled with hope, love, and the unbreakable bond of family. The morning sun bathed Margaret's old house in a warm, golden light, casting a hopeful glow over its worn exterior. Birds chirped merrily from the trees surrounding the property, heralding a new day and, for Linda and Valerie, a new chapter in their lives. Linda stretched and took a deep breath of the crisp, fresh air. "Valerie, wake up! It's our first day making this house our own," she called out cheerfully from the bottom of the stairs. Valerie bounded down, her youthful energy infectious. "I'm ready, Mum. Let's start with the living room." They stood in the living room, surveying the task ahead. Boxes were piled high, filled with memories of the past and the promise of the future. The old furniture, though dusty and worn, carried the essence of Margaret's life, and they were determined to restore it to its former glory. "Okay, let's begin," Linda said, rolling up her sleeves. "We'll start by unpacking and cleaning." As they worked, they chatted about their plans and dreams for the house. Valerie, with her boundless imagination, envisioned a garden full of flowers, just like the ones Margaret used to tend. Linda, with her practical touch, talked about refurbishing the old furniture and perhaps adding a fresh coat of paint to brighten the rooms. "Mom, look at this," Valerie said, holding up an old framed photograph she had found in one of the boxes. It was a picture of Margaret as a young woman, standing in front of the house with a radiant smile. Linda took the photograph, her eyes misting over. She loved this place so much. It's up to us to honor her memory and keep her spirit alive here. The house began to transform under their care. Dust was swept away, windows were cleaned to let in the light, and the air filled with the scent of fresh flowers that Valerie had picked from the garden. After hours of cleaning and organizing, they took a break on the porch, sipping lemonade and enjoying the fruits of their labor. "Mom, it's starting to feel like home already," Valerie said, a contented smile on her face. Linda nodded, looking around at the familiar yet refreshed surroundings. "Yes, it is. And it's only going to get better. We're building a new life here, one that Grandma would be proud of." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. They painted the walls in cheerful colors, repaired broken furniture, and filled the rooms with laughter and love. One afternoon, as they were working in the garden, a neighbor walked by and stopped to chat. "Hello, Linda. Hello, Valerie. It's so nice to see life returning to this house. Margaret would be so happy." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," Linda replied, smiling. "We're doing our best to honor her memory." Valerie added, "We're planting new flowers and taking care of the garden just like Grandma did. It's our way of keeping her with us." As the days turned into weeks, Linda and Valerie found a rhythm in their new life. They woke up early, tending to the garden and the house, and spent their evenings cooking and sharing stories. One evening, as they sat in the living room reading, Valerie looked up and said, "Mom, do you think Grandma knows what we're doing?" Linda put down her book and smiled warmly at her daughter. "I think she does, Valerie, and I think she's very proud of us. We're making this house a home again, just as she would have wanted." The bond between mother and daughter grew stronger with each passing day. They faced challenges together, celebrated their successes, and found comfort in the simple pleasures of their new life. On the first anniversary of Margaret's passing, they held a small ceremony in the garden. They invited friends and neighbors to join them in remembering the woman who had given them so much. Linda stood in front of the gathered crowd, holding the photograph of Margaret. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice filled with emotion. "This house, this garden, and everything in it are a testament to my grandmother's love and strength. Valerie and I have worked hard to honor her memory, and we are grateful for the support of this wonderful community." Valerie stepped forward, a bouquet of freshly picked flowers in her hands. "Grandma taught us the importance of family, love, and perseverance. We will always cherish her lessons and keep her spirit alive here." As they placed the flowers on a small memorial stone they had set up in the garden, the crowd clapped softly, a tribute to Margaret's lasting legacy. That night, Linda and Valerie sat on the porch, looking out at the garden illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. The morning light streamed through the small barred window of Ethan's cell, casting a stark pattern on the concrete floor. He sat on the edge of his narrow cot, staring at the beams of light, his mind heavy with the weight of his actions. The sound of distant footsteps and the occasional clang of metal doors echoed through the prison, a constant reminder of where he was and why he was there. Ethan had been in prison for several months now, each day forcing him to confront the choices that had led him here. He had betrayed his family, manipulated his grandmother's trust, and lost everything in the process. The guilt was a constant presence, gnawing at him, demanding that he make amends. One morning, as he sat lost in thought, the guard appeared at his cell door. "Evans, you have a visitor." Surprised, Ethan followed the guard to the visiting area, where he saw Mr. Johnson waiting. The lawyer's face was stern but not unkind. "Ethan," Mr. Johnson began as they sat down, "I've come to discuss an opportunity for you. A chance to start making things right." Ethan looked at him, a glimmer of hope piercing through his despair. "What do you mean?" "There's a rehabilitation program for inmates who show genuine remorse and a willingness to change," Mr. Johnson explained. "It involves working at a small medical clinic, helping underprivileged communities. It's hard work, but it's a chance to do some good." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "I want to do it," he said earnestly. "I need to do something to make up for what I've done." Mr. Johnson nodded. "I'll arrange everything. But remember, this is just the beginning. True redemption will take time and effort." A few weeks later, Ethan found himself standing outside a small clinic on the outskirts of town. The building was old but well maintained, with a steady stream of patients coming and going. He took a deep breath and walked inside, determined to start anew. The head nurse, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Clara, greeted him. "You must be Ethan. We've heard a lot about you. Welcome to our clinic." Ethan nodded, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Clara led him through the clinic, explaining his duties. "You'll be assisting with basic medical care, helping patients with their needs, and learning from our doctors. We expect you to work hard and show respect to everyone here." Over the following weeks, Ethan threw himself into his work. The days were long and exhausting, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. He listened to patients' stories, shared their burdens, and used his medical knowledge to provide care and comfort. One afternoon, as he was helping an elderly woman with her medication, she looked at him with a gentle smile. "Thank you, young man. You're doing a good thing here." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "I'm just trying to help," he replied softly. As the months passed, Ethan began to see the impact of his work. The community came to trust him, and he found himself forming connections with the patients and staff. One day, Clara pulled him aside. "Ethan, I've seen how hard you've worked and how much you've changed. You've earned the respect of everyone here. Keep going on this path, and you'll make a real difference." Ethan nodded, deeply moved by her words. "Thank you, Clara. I won't let you down." Back in his small apartment provided by the rehabilitation program, Ethan often reflected on his journey. He thought about Linda and Valerie, hoping they could find it in their hearts to forgive him someday. He knew it would take time, but he was committed to proving that he was a changed man. One morning he received a letter from Linda. His hands trembled as he opened it, fearing and hoping for her words. "Ethan, I've heard about your work at the clinic and wanted you to know that Valerie and I are proud of the steps you're taking. We haven't forgotten the past, but we believe in second chances. Keep doing good. Linda." Tears filled Ethan's eyes as he read the letter. It was a small step, but it meant everything to him. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket, a reminder of the family he still hoped to reconcile with. As he walked to the clinic that day, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was far from perfect, and his journey was just beginning, but he was on the right path. With each act of kindness, he felt a little more whole, a little more worthy of the redemption he sought.